I was standing on the porch when I saw the black SUV turn onto my gravel drive. The Kentucky sun was pouring gold across the fence line, catching every mote of dust. The tires kicked into the air. The door opened and a woman in a pale blue floral dress stepped out, pulling a black hard-shell suitcase with one hand, a worn canvas bag slung across her shoulder. She looked straight at me, not shy, not quite confident either, and said, "My father said you needed a wife." Before I could open my mouth, she set the suitcase down on my porch step, as if staying had already been decided long, before I ever had any say in the matter. Let me back up. My name is Caleb Whitfield. I am 38 years old, and I restore antique furniture for a living out of a workshop behind my house in Shelby County, Kentucky. It is not glamorous work. Most days it is just me, a lathe, a set of chisels, and whatever broken thing someone has brought me to make whole again. I live alone in the farmhouse my parents left me. For bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a kitchen big enough for a family I never had, the kind of space that echoes when you close a door too hard. I was married once. Her name was Monica. We were together for 5 years, divorced for 3. No children, no custody battles, no screaming matches over who gets the dining table. Just a piece of paper with 2 signatures, and a silence that stretched out long after she drove away. Monica did not leave because I was cruel or careless. She left because I was not enough of something she needed. Ambitious, I think, was the word she used. She wanted the city, the pace, the noise, the promise that tomorrow would look different from today. I wanted the fields. The last thing she ever said to me before she signed the papers was, "You're a good man, Caleb, just not the right one." And I believed that. For 3 full years, I carried that sentence around like a stone in my coat pocket, heavy enough to notice every day, not sharp enough to justify throwing away. I did not hate Monica for leaving. I hated that she made it sound like leaving was the only logical thing to do. My mornings had a shape to them. I would wake before dawn, brew a pot of black coffee, carry a cup out to the porch, and sit until the light came up over the treeing. Then I would walk out to the workshop and lose myself in whatever piece was on the bench, a chest of drawers with a cracked dovetail, a dining chair with a split rung. Afternoons, I sat on the porch again, reading, watching the fields change color with the seasons. Neighbors drove by, waved, stopped sometimes. They liked me, they worried about me. Mrs. Miller from down the road would bring casseroles and say things like, "Caleb, a man your age should not be eating alone every night." I was not lonely in the way that hurts all at once. I was lonely in the way that becomes routine, and I think that is the more dangerous kind because you stopped looking for the exit. Then there was Harold. Harold Jennings lived 2 fields, over 72 years old, built like a fence post, stubborn as the roots beneath one. After my father died, Harold became the closest thing I had to a dad. He taught me how to mend a fence rail without splitting the wood, how to sweat a copper pipe, and how to sit inside silence without feeling like it was going to crush you. Every morning, rain or shine, he walked over with 2 cups of coffee, one black, one loaded with enough sugar to make your teeth ache. The sweet one was always mine. He would settle into the rocking chair on my porch and say things like, "A house this size needs noise, son." I never argued. I just drank the coffee that was too sweet and let the quiet do the answering. Harold had a daughter, Claire. She was 34, a veterinarian working at a clinic in Louisville, about 45 minutes up the interstate. I had known Claire since we were young, but we were never close. She left for college, then veterinary school, and I stayed right where I was. Every year. She came home a few times to visit her father, and I would see her from a distance crossing Harold's yard, waving from her car as she pulled out of his driveway. We never exchanged more than 2 or 3 polite sentences. But I noticed one thing about her that I could never quite explain. She always carried a small leather-bound notebook, brown, scuffed at the corners, soft from years of handling, tucked into her jacket pocket, like something she did not want anyone to see, but could not bear to leave behind. That notebook, I did not know then what it held. I know now, and it changed everything. Claire moved into the downstairs guest room without ceremony. I offered the room. She accepted, and neither of us discussed it further. The reason she gave was simple enough. Harold had just had knee replacement surgery and needed someone nearby to help with his recovery. But Harold refused to let his daughter waste money on a motel room when his neighbor had 4 empty bedrooms. And in his words, 0 excuses. So Claire showed up with her suitcase and her canvas bag and that sentence about her father and a wife. And I let her in because Harold asked, and I never said no to Harold. I believe the reason completely. Looking back now, I wonder how I missed what was right in front of me. But that is the thing about someone loving you quietly. They are so careful about it, so deliberate in disguising the shape of what they feel that you mistake their care for coincidence and their attention for politeness. The first week was gentle. Claire kept to her space. She did not rearrange my things or try to make the house hers. But small changes crept in the kind you do not notice at first. Not until you realize you have already gotten used to them and cannot imagine going back. Wildflowers in a glass jar on the kitchen counter, picked fresh, the stems still wet. A clean dish towel folded neatly on the oven handle, where the old stained one used to hang. And every single morning, without fail, there was a pot of black coffee waiting for me when I came downstairs at 5. Not just any coffee strong. No sugar brewed to the exact shade of dark I preferred. The first time it happened, I stood in the kitchen holding the warm mug and asked her how she knew I took it black. She smiled and said, "Lucky guess." It was not a lucky guess. Harold had told her every detail how I drank my coffee, what time I woke, which chair I favor on the porch, but I did not know that yet, and Claire was not about to tell me. She never touched my bedroom, never moved my boots in the hallway, or reorganized a bookshelf. I had arranged by memory rather than alphabet. She respected my space the way someone does when they understand that space is all a person is left and they are holding on to it with both hands. I noticed this about her, and it made me trust her in a way I had not trusted anyone in a long time, not because she tried to earn it, but because she never seemed to be trying at all. One afternoon about 10 days in, Claire walked out to the workshop carrying a glass of water. She set it on the bench and stood watching me work on a rocking chair. I was restoring a ladder-back maple built around 1940. It was nearly identical to the one on Harold's porch. Claire reached out and ran her fingers along the arm of the chair, tracing the grain slowly, as if reading something written into the wood. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said softly, "He talks about you more than he talks about me." There was no jealousy in her voice. No sadness either, just a fact, delivered plainly. I did not know what to say, so I said nothing. We stood there in the smell of sawdust and linseed oil while the late sun cut through the workshop door, and the silence between us did not feel empty. It felt like something warm and patient was slowly filling it. Something neither of us had a name for yet. That evening, I stepped out onto the porch and found Claire sitting in my rocking chair, writing in her notebook, the leather one. She was bent over it, pencil moving quickly across the page, her hair falling forward over one shoulder. When she heard the screen door click, she closed the notebook and slipped it into her jacket pocket in one smooth, practiced motion, like a reflex she had rehearsed 1,000 times. I did not ask what she was writing, but I noticed something that stayed with me long after I went back inside. She was writing in pencil, not ink, as though she wanted to preserve the right to erase every word at any moment, as though whatever she was putting down on those pages was something she was not yet sure she was allowed to keep. A few days later, I found a pencil drawing in the kitchen trash. It was a sketch of the rocking chair I had been restoring, drawn from memory. Every joint and spindle and curve placed with quiet precision. Claire had crumpled it and buried it under a paper towel, but she had drawn it perfectly. I smoothed it out on the counter and looked at it for a long time. I did not understand then why it made my chest feel tight. I just knew that someone had looked at my work closely enough to carry the image in her mind. And that feeling was not something I was used to. Claire Iyer helped me fix the fence behind the house one Saturday. It was hot, the kind of deep Kentucky heat that sits on your skin like a wet cloth and does not let go. She rolled up her sleeves and handed me boards while I nailed them into the posts. At one point, I reached for the water bottle at the same moment she was passing it to me, and our fingers touched. We both stopped. Neither of us pulled away quickly. Neither of us said a word. That was the first time I realized that silence between two people could mean something other than emptiness. Harold, meanwhile, was planting seeds he never intended to water himself. One morning, over coffee, he mentioned as casually as though it just occurred to him that Claire had turned down a marriage proposal in Louisville 2 years earlier. I asked why she turned the man down. Harold took a slow sip, looked out across the field where the mist was still burning off the grass, and said, "She said the man didn't feel like home." Then he turned his head and looked at me, not at the field, not at his coffee cup, at me. He held my gaze for a beat longer than felt natural, then went back to his coffee without another word. At the time, I thought he was simply sharing a story about his daughter. Now, telling it back from the other side, I know exactly what he was doing. He was telling a story about me. Claire never asked me about Monica. Not once. And somehow that silence said more than every question anyone else had ever asked about my marriage, my divorce, and whether I was doing okay. She just showed up every morning with coffee she already knew I liked, and a quiet presence that demanded nothing in return. And that, I think, is why I started letting her in without ever realizing the door was opening. There were small fractures, though, moments I did not understand at the time but have replayed so many times since that they feel smooth as river stones. One evening, Claire stepped outside to take a phone call. Her voice came through the screen door tight and clipped, and nothing like the voice I had gotten used to hearing across the kitchen table. "I told you it's not about that," she said, and then something quieter I could not make out. She came back inside smiling like nothing had happened. I let it go, but I started paying closer attention after that. And then there was the afternoon Mrs. Miller came by unannounced, the way she always did. She saw Claire at the kitchen table, and her face lit up like a struck match. "Oh," she said, loud enough to carry through every wall in the house. "Is she your new girlfriend?" I said, "No." Claire said, "No." We both said it quickly, almost at the exact same time, like a rehearsed denial. Neither of us fully believed that night. For the first time since she had moved in, Claire did not sit on the porch to write in her notebook. She stayed in the guest room with the door closed, and the porch felt emptier than it had any right to feel. Monica came back on a Tuesday. No phone call, no text, no warning of any kind. Just a white sedan parked in my driveway, and the sound of high heels clicking on gravel. A sound that did not belong in Shelby County, and never had. She looked different. New hair, shorter, styled in a way that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. Expensive clothes, a gold watch I had never seen before. Thin and polished, catching the afternoon light as she stepped out of the car. But her eyes were the same, calculating, always measuring the distance in a room before deciding whether it was worth staying in. She said she had realized what she lost. She said distance had given her clarity. She used words like perspective and growth and second chances, and they came out smooth and rehearsed like lines from a script she had memorized on a long drive from wherever she had been living. Part of me, the part that still carried her last sentence around like a pocket stone, wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that I had been the right one all along, and she had simply needed 3 years and some regret to see it clearly. But I could not believe her because Monica had not come back when I was alone. She had come back when she heard someone else was in the house. Mrs. Miller had made certain that every person within 15 miles of my property knew Claire Jennings was staying with me, and it had taken Monica exactly 9 days after that news spread to the county to show up at my door with her new hair and her rehearsed speech about second chances. Monica met Claire that evening. It was not dramatic. There was no shouting, no tears, no plates crashing against walls. It was worse than all of that because it was quiet and deliberate and surgical. Monica sat down at the kitchen table, crossed her legs, smiled at Claire, the way you smile at someone you have already decided is beneath your concern, and said, "So, are you the new charity project?" Caleb loves fixing broken things. Claire did not respond. She stood up from the table, walked to the sink, and began washing dishes that were already mostly clean. That was all. No comeback, no defense, no performance of any kind. She just refused to engage. And in that refusal, she said everything that needed to be said because silence in the face of cruelty is its own kind of answer. Monica was smart. She always had been. It was one of the things I had once admired about her. Before I understood the difference between intelligence that builds and intelligence that dismantles, It did not take her long to piece together who Claire was. Harold's daughter, the girl who had grown up 2 fields over, the woman who, according to Mrs. Miller's enthusiastic and very public speculation, had been carrying a quiet affection for me for longer than anyone could count. And Monica did not use this information to attack Claire directly. She aimed at me instead because she knew that doubt planted in the right soil grows faster than anything. She didn't come here because her father needed help. Monica said that night, standing in my kitchen, leaning against the counter with her arms folded. She came here because her father told her, "You were alone. Don't you see, Caleb? This whole thing was arranged." The words landed the way cold water does not painful, but shocking enough to steal your breath for a moment. Not because Monica was being cruel, because she was being accurate. She had taken something true, something fragile and unfinished, and not yet ready to be spoken aloud, and reshaped it into a weapon. And she had aimed it directly at the center of everything Claire and I had been quietly, wordlessly building over those 3 weeks. I looked at Claire. I waited for her to deny it, to explain, to give me something solid I could hold on to. She stood in the doorway with her hands at her sides, looked me in the eyes, and said very quietly, "She's not wrong, but she's not right either." Claire Ryer left that night. She did not argue. She did not cry. She did not try to explain what those 6 words meant or why she chose them. She packed the black suitcase and the worn canvas bag, loaded them into her SUV without a word, and drove away into the dark. I stood on the porch watching the red tail lights shrink and disappear past the tree line at the end of my road. But before she walked out the front door, she placed something on the kitchen table, her leather notebook, open to the last page she had written on. I did not open it right away. I was too confused, too caught between 2 versions of the same truth, one of them sharp and polished, the other soft and trembling and unsure. Monica stayed the night. The next morning, she sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee she had brewed from beans she found in the wrong cabinet, using a filter pulled from the wrong drawer. And she said with a satisfaction she did not bother to disguise, "See, it's better with just us." I looked around the kitchen. No wild flowers in the glass jar on the counter. No smell of coffee brewed at 5 in the morning by someone who already knew how I liked it without ever being told. No crumpled pencil drawing in the trash. No evidence that someone had been watching me closely enough to sketch my work from memory. The house was not better. It was just empty again, the same hollow echo I had been living inside for 3 years. And this time I noticed because now I knew what the alternative felt like. "No," I said, "it isn't." Monica left before noon. I did not watch her drive away. I had stopped looking in that direction long before that morning and had only just realized it. I sat down at the kitchen table and finally opened the notebook. The morning light was coming to the window, pale and thin, and the house was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall above the stove. The last entry Claire had written read, "Day 1, he drinks his coffee black, but stirs it anyway. Day 4, he hums when he sands wood. Day 9, I think I've loved him since I was 22. My hands were not steady." I turned back to the first page, and that is when the floor dropped out from under me. The notebook was not a journal of 3 weeks. It was a record of 10 years. Every time Claire had come home to visit Harold, she had written about me a sentence, sometimes 2 at most, small, precise observations, the kind you only notice about someone when you are paying very close attention and try not to let anyone see you watching. My laugh, the way I leaned against the porch railing when I was thinking, the song I hummed when sanding a chair spindle, the way I always stir my coffee even though there was nothing in it to stir, all of it in pencil. 10 years of pencil marks that could have been erased at any moment, but never were. Monica's weapon was not cruelty. It was accuracy. She took a truth and turned it into a grenade. I sat at that kitchen table for 2 hours reading 10 years of someone loving me in pencil erasable. Uncertain, but still there on every single page. I took the notebook to Harold's house the next morning. The sun was barely up, the dew still heavy on the grass between our properties. He was sitting on his porch, knee wrapped in its brace, coffee in hand, looking out at the fields the way he always did, like a man reviewing a life he was mostly satisfied with. I climbed the steps and set the notebook on the small wooden table between our chairs. He looked down at it. He did not seem surprised. He did not reach for it or open it. He just looked at it the way you look at something you have been expecting to arrive for a very long time. "You knew?" I asked. He took a slow sip of his coffee and set the cup down carefully on the armrest. "Son, I've known since she was 22 and came home from Thanksgiving crying because you called her kid." I sat down in the chair across from him and let that settle into me like rain soaking into dry ground. Harold told me everything, and he told it the way he told all important things, slowly, without ornament, like a man laying bricks. Claire had fallen for me years ago, all the way back when I was still married to Monica. She never said a single word about it because I had a wife, and Claire was not the kind of woman who stepped into someone else's story uninvited. She watched from the next field over. She came home for visits and sat on her father's porch and wrote in her notebook, and then drove back to Louisville carrying something she could not put down and could not show to anyone. Year after year, visit after visit, pencil line after pencil line. When the divorce happened, Claire wanted to come to me immediately. She wanted to drive down from Louisville, knock on my door, and say out loud every single thing she had spent years writing in pencil. But she stopped herself. She could not do it. She was afraid that I would look at her and see not Claire, but a convenience, a warm body to fill the empty side of a bed, a rebound dressed up as something deeper than it was. She was afraid I would be kind about it, which would have been worse than rejection, kindness with pity underneath it, the way you thank someone for a gift you never wanted. She did not want to be the woman I chose because I was lonely. She wanted to be the woman I chose because she was her, because I actually saw her, not just a space she could fill. So she waited and kept writing in pencil because pencil could be erased. And erasing felt safer than the possibility of being told she was not wanted. Harold was the one who finally made the plan. When his knee surgery came onto the calendar, he saw the opening, and he took it the way only Harold would, quietly, practically, without telling Claire what he was really doing, until she was already halfway out the door. He told her come home, stay close, help with his recovery, and let things develop on their own without forcing anything. My father said, "You needed a wife." That sentence Claire spoke on my porch the day she arrived was not a command Harold had given. It was not a directive or an instruction. It was Claire's own interpretation of her father's gentle, deliberate nudge, filtered through 10 years of longing and hope, and the kind of fear that comes from wanting something so badly. You are terrified of reaching for it. What Harold had actually said was much simpler. He had called her one evening and said the boy needs someone, Claire. And Claire, standing alone in her apartment kitchen in Louisville with the phone pressed hard against her ear, had whispered back, "I just wanted it to be me." I did not drive to Louisville that night to make a confession. I drove there to stop being the last person to understand what everyone around me had already seen clearly for years. It was dark when I pulled out of the driveway. A light rain was falling, tapping against the windshield in a quiet, steady rhythm that kept time with the beating in my chest. I found Claire's veterinary clinic on a side street near the eastern edge of downtown Louisville. The front lights were still on. She was pulling a night shift the way she always did when she needed her hands busy and her mind occupied. I walked through the front entrance carrying the leather notebook. The waiting room was empty except for the low hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere in the back. Claire was standing behind the reception counter in a white lab coat, her hair pulled back, her eyes rimmed red. She saw the notebook in my hands before she saw my face, and I watched the color drain slowly from hers like water running out of a glass. "You used a pencil," I said, "because you were afraid I'd say no." I held the notebook toward her with both hands. "But Claire, I'm here to tell you that you don't need an eraser anymore." She did not rush forward. She did not collapse into tears. She reached out with steady hands and took the notebook from mine, opened it to the last written page, and pulled a pen from the chest pocket of her lab coat. Not a pencil, a pen, black ink. And for the first time in 10 years, Claire wrote in ink. She wrote one line. She did not show me what it said. She did not need to. The ink itself was the answer. Permanent, deliberate, no longer afraid of being rubbed away or taken back. After a decade of pencil, the ink said everything. Claire did not move back into my house right away. and I did not ask her to. Louisville was less than an hour from Shelby County, and we had spent 10 years arriving at this point. We could afford to build the rest of it slowly, one honest day at a time. The first month was phone calls. I called her every morning while the coffee brewed, and she picked up every time. Sometimes we talked about ordinary things: Harold's physical therapy progress, a horse she had treated at the clinic, a walnut bureau I was stripping down to bare wood. Sometimes we did not talk at all. We just listened to each other breathe on the line. The sound of her coffee maker humming on the other end like a second heartbeat in the room. I never hung up first. She never ended a call without a small pause, a beat of quiet, as though she was giving me one last chance to say something I was not quite ready to say yet. On weekends, she drove down, and we spent the days doing things that quietly mattered without ever calling them dates: mending fence rails together, cooking dinner side by side in the kitchen that still had wildflowers on the counter, sitting on the porch, reading our separate books until the sun dipped behind the tree and the cicadas took over the conversation. I noticed she was writing in the notebook more often now, and more often the marks on the page were in ink. By the third month, I had finished restoring the rocking chair, the maple ladderback circa 1940, the twin of the one on Harold's porch. I carried it out to my own porch one Thursday morning before dawn and set it next to mine, close enough that the armrests nearly touched. I did not say anything about it, did not point out or explain. That Friday evening, Claire pulled into the gravel driveway, walked up the porch steps, and stopped. She saw the two chairs sitting side by side. She stood there for a long moment, not moving, and I could see something shift behind her eyes, not surprise exactly, but recognition, as though she'd been waiting for this gesture without ever allowing herself to expect it. Then she sat down in the new one without a word, and we rocked together in silence for an hour. It was the loudest conversation I had ever had. At 6 months, Claire transferred to a small veterinary practice near Shelby County, a family-owned clinic that treated mostly farm animals and the occasional house cat with an attitude problem. She rented a little cottage about 2 miles down the road from my place. I asked her once, sitting on the porch after dinner on a warm evening, why she did not simply move in with me. She turned and looked at me for a long time, the kind of look that reaches past what you were saying to find the thing you have not said yet, and told me, because I want you to ask me to stay, not because it's convenient, not because the drive is shorter, because you want me here. I understood what she meant. She had spent 10 years choosing me in silence, and she needed me to choose her out loud in a way that left no room for doubt or interpretation. So I did not ask. Not yet. She deserved a question I had spent time building carefully, not something I blurted out over the remains of leftover dinner. Harold healed well. His knee grew stronger each week, and by summer he was walking the field again, slower than before, leaning on a cane some mornings, but steady and present. One evening, he walked over to my porch, climbed the steps carefully, and saw the two rocking chairs sitting side by side. He stood there looking at them and smiled in a way I had never seen from him before. Quiet and deep and completely satisfied. The expression of a man watching something he planted years ago finally break through the soil and reach for the light. He turned to leave, then stopped at the bottom step and looked back. "I built one of those for your mother 30 years ago," he said. "Took your father 6 months to put the second one next to it." He paused. "You're faster." Then he walked home across the field in the fading light, without once turning around. I sat in my chair and listened to his footsteps disappear into grass. And I thought about how long it takes some men to say what matters most, and how Harold had just said it in fewer than 20 words. A year passed. I had repainted the living room, built new kitchen shelves with Harold's help. He insisted on holding the level, even when his knee ached, and replaced every fence post in the backyard with fresh-cut cedar. The house did not look dramatically different. It looked ready, like it had been holding its breath for years, and was finally allowed to exhale. On an autumn afternoon, with the leaves turning gold and rust along the county road, and the air carrying that first crisp bite that tells you summer has finally let go, I drove to Claire's clinic. I brought the leather notebook. I opened it to the page she had written in ink that rainy night at her Louisville clinic. The one line she had never shown me. Below her words, I had written a line of my own. "Stay, not for a weekend, not for your father. For every morning I don't want to drink coffee alone. Claire Eyre read it. She set the notebook down on the counter carefully, as though it were something fragile and sacred. She looked up at me, and her eyes were clear. No tears, no trembling, just the steady, certain gaze of a woman who had made this decision a very long time ago and had simply been waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. I already packed, she said. She moved in on a Tuesday. No fanfare, no celebration, no announcement, just a pale blue floral dress, a black suitcase, a worn canvas bag, and a leather notebook she had finally stopped hiding. She placed the suitcase by the bedroom door and set the notebook on the kitchen shelf, right next to the jar of wildflowers that had not gone empty since the first week she walked into my life. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, the house did not echo when I closed the front door. Love, when it is real, does not crash into you like a wave. It sits beside you on the porch and waits, patient and unhurried, until you are ready to turn your head and notice it has been there all along. Monica once told me I was not the right one, and I believed her for 3 years. 3 full years of carrying that verdict around like it was gospel truth. But Claire spent 10 years writing my name in pencil, not because I was wrong or unworthy, but because she was terrified she would be erased from my life before she ever had the chance to truly belong in it. The right person is not the one who never makes you doubt yourself. The right person is the one who writes your name in pencil for a decade and never once picks up the eraser. The notebook sits on the kitchen shelf, now next to the wildflowers Claire still picks every Sunday morning from the edge of Harold's Field. She writes in it most evenings, sitting in her rocking chair on the porch with a cup of tea balanced on the armrest, always in ink now. Always. And sometimes when she is not looking, I open it and add a line of my own. She has never once mentioned finding my words in there, but the pages keep turning forward, and my lines have never been crossed out. She came to my door with a suitcase and a lie she could barely hold together. But underneath that lie was 10 years of pencil marks that never faded. And I think that is what love actually looks like. Have you ever loved someone in pencil afraid to make it permanent because you did not know if they would keep the page? And if someone showed up at your door tomorrow carrying a suitcase and a truth they have been holding on to for years, would you let them in? If this story moved you, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, and drop a comment below. Would you have opened that notebook?